So for my presentation, we're going to be looking at Sin Nombre and especially the transnational ideas expressed in the movie. For my paper, I focused on identity in Sin Nombre, which is important, and I'm going to continue to focus on identity. However, in my paper, I was more focused on how the characters gained an identity through the journey of immigrating to the U.S. and not more on like identity and transnationalism. So for my presentation, I'm going to focus more on how identity plays a role in these transnational themes, in what ways the characters are identified, and how these identities act as borders, and also a few other ways that identity plays a role. And so, how are characters identified? In Hamid Nafisi's article, it talks about skin and body, and how we are confined to our skin. The quote is, the body experienced as a prison house of semiotically marked flesh whose cultural display of the objectively material substance of our subjective existence. So how this relates to Sin Nombre is mainly through tattoos. They play a major role of marking someone. You know, Willie throughout the movies always seemed to be part of a group, or is always part of this group of the gang, right? It's his identity because of the tattoos he has. They stick with him and they trap him. He's a gang member wherever he goes, and this is important when you think about the influence the gang has. And that leads me into my next point, which is the gang is beyond borders. The Mara Salvatrucha gang is a transnational gang. It's all over Latin America, and it's even in the U.S. It unites people from different countries. It connects them, and it keeps them from leaving. It becomes more of an identity than their national identity. Willie is more a gang member. He's more of a member of the Mara Salvatrucha than he is, a Honduran. Willie is always seen as a gang member. Even when he does something heroic, he is still always going to be seen as a gang member and not a Honduran. It's the tattoos. It's a concept of the Mara Salvatrucha gang that keeps people from liking him. He is basically grouped into that membership. And then one thing worth noting is how Benito's journey to kill Willie, on that journey, the only real problem they run into is other gang members, not Border Patrol, not the police, and not the people from a different country complaining about these other people getting in there. So I thought that was interesting to note. Another thing is how borders and gangs work. I found borders interesting in this movie because the large borders didn't seem to pose much of a threat to the characters. The U.S. border is simply just a vague river that you can swim across. And in Foho's article, it talks about how borders are depicted as random landmarks and not the actual fence that is there. The real border seems to be the gang/memberships. Its identity, it's an identity that doesn't relate to a nation. I think it's more than just for dramatic reasons that Willie is stopped. Syra is able to get across and not Willie. Even though Syra is the one that's crossing the border, the gang that Willie is part of acts more like a border and border patrol than the actual border patrol for the U.S. does. The gang is the ones that are hunting them down and trying not to let them get away. Syra is met with resistance, but not nearly as much as Willie. The gang has, this kind of nationalist, patrionist way of keeping people in. They enforce rules and loyalties to the gang. When they are broken, there are serious consequences, just like a nation has consequences for laws broken. And it leads me to my next point, which is gangs offer no way out. And it's kind of going back to their extremely nationalistic or membership based. In an article by Grant Farid, we see him discuss how there's no way out for members of a gang. Now, obviously, his article, I think, is more focused on kind of American gangs and kind of the race gangs that we have here. But kind of one of his quotes as important as gangs are the major compensatory social structure that's been generated in the face of a structural unemployment and deindustrialization. We see this in Sin Nombre as the games seem to control more of someone's culture and identity than a nation would. People recognize gang members before they would recognize anything else, and which is really important in a Latin American country where there's kind of a lack of diversity of the skin and language. So gangs are kind of filling in this membership, right? These different gangs control different areas and sectors of the land, and they don't allow people to cross. And there's different areas where the train tracks, you can't go across the train tracks because over there's the other gang, and they're more of a hard border than we see some of these nations have. As when Syra is going, I think, to Guatemala, they're met by very little resistance. I mean, they are stopped by the border patrol and they're kind of forced to get sorted through, but they're basically just let to go straight through. While as if you're caught in a gang member's territory, you'd probably be shot, and they are shot at. So now I'm going to talk about some of the other factors that are not so intensely gang and kind of identity related, but they still have importance to the themes of Sin Nombre. One thing is immigration and push and pull factors. There are a lot of push and pull factors in the movies we watched this semester, and especially a lot of pull factors coming from the U.S. The U.S. almost functions as a gang for Syra. Syra doesn't really have a group, and she wants to join a group so that she can have some of the benefits of the group, kind of like how Willie's trying to join the gang because he doesn't really have an identity, he doesn't really have anything going for himself, so he wants to join that gang. And so we see in Foha's article, it talks about how the U.S. tries to maintain its national identity and stop people that would stop people that they think would ruin the national identity. Syra is that thing. She's an illegal immigrant, but she's doing everything she can to join the U.S., but she's, because she's that type of person, they want to keep her out. And I also thought it was kind of interesting how Benito has to get beat for 13 seconds. And it almost, it's not really a correlation, but it almost matches kind of the 14 days that it would take for Syra to get to the U.S. I think it's just kind of showing that similar struggle, that similar basically, that you have to overcome this kind of, you have to basically prove that you are good enough to be part of this thing, right? To be an American citizen, you have to go through all these tests to become an American citizen. To join a gang, you have to go through all these tests to prove that you can join the gang, that you're hard enough, that you're tough enough. Syra has to be, accepted, and it's all just about maintaining that identity